Thank you to the Moving the Needle corporate sponsors, Home Infusion Options and Metro Infusion Center, and our exhibitors, Takeda, Janssen, and Bristol-Myers Squibb. You share our mission of advancing patient care and make events like this and our grant making possible.
So within the theme of talking about cancers, it's now my pleasure to present one last brief presentation for you before we wrap tonight. And this is by my colleague, Dr. Sonia Kupfer. Dr. Kupfer is Associate Chief of our GI section. She's also the Director of the Physician Scientist Development Program that I mentioned earlier tonight. And she directs, very importantly, our GI Cancer Risk and Prevention Program, one of the only programs of its kind in the country. And we're grateful for her leadership and her long time with the University of Chicago, like many of us. She's going to tell you about one of her projects that's been funded by GIRF.
Great, thanks so much, David. And like some of you, colorectal cancer is personal for me. A very close family member, when I was a senior at Highland Park High School, was diagnosed with this disease and unfortunately succumbed to it. And that lit a fire in my belly that I didn't want anyone else to have to deal with this disease. And so prevention of colorectal cancer and more broadly GI cancers became my passion. Also, I trained at the University of Chicago, as you heard, from the beginning, medical school, residency, fellowship, and I was also struck by the really unacceptable inequities that exist, certainly in the community that we serve. And you can see here that colorectal cancer rates are about 20% higher in Black Americans, and death rates are almost 40% higher. And so this lit yet another fire in my belly that we really needed to figure out how to address these disparities. And we know that, like most complex diseases, and colorectal cancer is a complex disease, it's really an interaction between our genetic makeup and our environment. And, luck and bad luck in that case. But I want to introduce you to a new concept. You've heard about the genome or the microbiome, but there's this concept of the exposome. And this is really where we're trying to understand how an individual responds to their environment. And this can be their personal environment, their personal exposome, their habits, their diet. And those are certainly informed in part by their external exposome or their environment, where they live, where they grew up. Are they, do they have stress, chronic stress in their lives? And really then trying to understand how these different exposures interact with biological responses. And this is really also very important when we think about disparities, because clearly there are structural issues and structural differences and disparities in these different domains. So the GIRF, GI Research Foundation, thankfully, I'm very thankful, has funded our pilot study to really start to dissect this interaction. So we're really interested in understanding how diet interacts with the microbiome to then predispose to colorectal cancer. And importantly, by understanding this, we can intervene on this. But we really have to kind of start to understand and pick apart what are the different contributors. So we know that diet affects colorectal cancer risk, and in particular, high-fat diet and low fiber. And this increases substances known as primary bile acids. These are then, in the intestine, converted into something called secondary bile acids, and these are converted, importantly, by the microbiome. And then these secondary bile acids, some of them at least, when they make it into the colon, if they make it into the colon, can, under certain circumstances, increase the risk of developing colon tumors. So what are we going to do in this pilot study? So we're going to take diverse individuals, and at the University of Chicago, we serve a diverse population of African Americans and individuals of European descent. So we're going to take men and women of these two groups. We're going to get their stool, and we're going to use the technology, some of which you've heard about today, to look at their bile acid profiles, to look at their microbiome profiles, and to link those to those exposures that I talked about, where they live, their diets, et cetera. And then importantly, we're going to leverage what you heard about with the organoids from individuals to look really at how do their colons in these mini guts that we can culture in a petri dish, how do they respond specifically to these toxic secondary bile acids? And then we can understand, why would one person go on to have potential risk for colorectal cancer development because of these secondary bile acids and another person might not. And by doing this, we hope again that we can really understand it so that we can then eventually intervene. And if you look in your booklet, we have my colleague Ed McDonald is really working hard on trying to figure out how we can better intervene specifically on diets within our population. So thank you so much to GERF for funding this colorectal cancer project at the University of Chicago, and I look forward to updating you in the future. Thank you.